In God we trust. Hmm? Huh? Okay, well, if not God, then in what do we trust? I originally thought that this whole sermon was going to be about how we trust in the universe. But another sermon showed up instead, and so they can be like that. You plan for this one sermon, and another one shows up, and so then it becomes a matter of trusting that the sermon that did show up is infinitely better than the sermon that didn't show up. Let's go find out. I think that I might be the last remaining progressive who has a print subscription to the Amarillo Globe News. You have one? Okay, all right. Oh, right, okay. It's because my attitude, maybe this is similar to yours, my attitude is that subscribing to the local newspaper is kind of a civic duty, right? You know, it's like right up there with voting for school bonds and jury duty. You just need to do that. This is not to say that I actually enjoy our newspaper. Pretty much every day I am alternately appalled or disappointed by their editorial decisions. But I keep reading it. If for no other reason than to remind myself we have work to do. And I also check the basketball scores. As often as our newspaper irks the snot out of me, I was very glad to see that about a week ago, they went ahead and they printed all of their names, the names of the Catholic priests who have been credibly accused of sexually abusing children here in the Texas Panhandle. The Amarillo Globe News went ahead and they printed the names, the parishes served, all of it, right there in ink. Now, they didn't publish the names of all of the nearly 300 priests that have been credibly accused that served here in Texas, that just the ones who served the Panhandle. And that was important. I read the list. I contemplated what it meant. My husband read the list very carefully. As you know, he grew up here in the Panhandle. He was raised Methodist. But he read that list very carefully, and there, among all of the names, there was the name of the priest who had abused boys in his hometown. He remembers those boys. They were usually Hispanic, usually poor, usually not doing really well in school. He remembers that priest, his name, what he looked like, his voice. A man who, as the intermediary to God, a man who carried the authority of the institution and who held terrible power with no local accountability. My husband remembers all this, remembers it keenly, but even he knows that he cannot fully understand the shattering effect of that abuse, how it wrecked lives, how it divided and made difficult people's ability to reconcile what is holy with their lived experience of hell. That list was very important. Because what that list was showing us was not that it was just the error of individuals that made this hell. It was the systemic institutional practice of suppressing the problem, of not naming the names, of just rearranging people, ignoring the complaints, relocating priests to other parishes where the people would be too poor, too powerless to make any problems. The evil was not just done by the individuals, it was the systemic actions of the institution that perpetuated that hell. And it is that institution that now must account for it. So putting the names of those imperfect men, some dead, some still alive, putting their names in the paper was not really enough to fix it all, but it was a start. And may that counting help us all heal. I'm sharing all of this with you to remind you how power without accountability corrupts even sacred words. How power without accountability corrupts sacred relationships. And I'm reminding you all of this, that this was part of why the Puritans wanted to place authority at the local congregational level. It's why this congregation has the power to decide what worship is going to be like, to decide who's going to lead you. And it's why you vote to call or vote to dismiss a minister. This is called congregational polity. And it's our heritage in this denomination. It's our heritage in this congregation. What this means is if I start saying just really bizarre things that do not seem to be in keeping with what you want to have preached here, you can vote to dismiss me. It's completely within your right. If I start acting oddly, you have the right to file a complaint and say, something's wrong with our minister. You can ask for help. You get it. Now, you might think that I'm saying that all of this democracy, all of this local authority has vaccinated our congregations against abuse, but I can't. I won't ever say such a thing because despite these roots, despite our puritanical heritage, our denomination has seen plenty of clerical misconduct, sexual misconduct, financial misconduct, emotional abuse constituting misconduct. The difference between that list in the paper and what happens here is that our denomination began the process of interrupting and examining abuse much, much earlier, a while back. The Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations started this work back in maybe about the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I think it's pretty easy for us to say much of this work began as more women became ministers. As more women became ministers, they began hearing really horrible stories of serial abusers. And they began noticing that a lot of this misconduct had previously just sort of been shushed or ignored. And that behavior had been kind of shushed and ignored precisely because of the authority of the individual congregations. At the denominational level, they said, who are we to criticize how a congregation and their minister want to carry on? The women ministers called bullshit on that argument. And change began. Misconduct was named as misconduct. Abuse was named as abuse. And then the individuals were held accountable. Since we've been at it a few decades now, can we say we've solved the problem? Absolutely not. There are still individuals who will err and misconduct. But I want you to know the process to become a Unitarian Universalist minister has gotten a lot more thorough. It's much more rigorous. And it is now structured to hold our clergy accountable. So the whole process of becoming a minister is testing over and over. So how do you do when you are held accountable? Over and over. Because you will be held accountable, right? And now, if misconduct occurs, the association will no longer simply look the other way or just wave it off to local peculiarities. They will take it seriously. They will listen to complaints. They will send somebody in. They will ask everyone to figure out, how do we put the marbles back in? Up. I'm telling you all this because our worship theme for the month of February is trust. And because we've welcomed in new members, I want to be more explicit about the trust that we place in one another and we place here in this fellowship. And forgive me, but I believe that if you bring up the dangerous, difficult, painful subjects, we take away some of the power that they would gain by not being discussed. Sociology researcher Brené Brown. Anybody know Brené Brown? Seen some of her TED Talks? She started researching, looking into trust and how trust works with people. And she has come to recognize that trust is built in increments. It's very hard to just have one big gesture that establishes a deep trust. Instead, it's like the marbles in the jar, collected slowly. And Brené Brown, she came up with a very clever acronym to understand all the different kinds of marbles that you can put into your jar. It's a great video, great books. Go check them out if you really want to get a sense of the importance of the work. She said that for a person to earn another person's trust, there has to be clear boundaries. Where I end, you begin. A person has to be reliable and willing to acknowledge their mistakes. To become trustworthy, a person needs to be able to hold confidence and act with integrity. It's really, really helpful if they can be non-judgmental and generous. So that when I come in with an absolute hair on fire crisis, perhaps of my own making, my friend doesn't say, "I told you so." Instead, my friend says, "Have a cookie." That's non-judgmental and generous. I really like it. When a person can consistently act with all of these qualities, other people will begin to trust them. And that's really good for the relationships between people. But now I want us to consider, what does trust look like here in a congregation? Because becoming a member of this place means trusting this place. Trusting enough to put yourself in it. Trusting it enough to contribute to it. Trusting it enough to see it be changed through our work. So that it is not just the best place for us right now, but that it is becoming a place for those who are not yet here. Because there are people who are looking for a home. And we will make this through the relationships with one another, with the covenant that we hold with one another and working together, meeting together. This is a place where we trust one another that we can bring our whole, imperfect, unfinished selves. And then we can work together to be nourished, take strength and courage to go forward and love the hell out of this world. Becoming a member here means trusting the elected leaders to consider what is best for the whole body going forward, mindful of the past, serving the needs of the present, and preparing for the future. Now, because this congregation is made up of people, and people can be so people-y, I think it's safe for us to recognize that in this congregation, people have made mistakes. Trust has been broken here. I only know of a couple times. But given that you've been at this for almost 70 years, I think it's a given. The mistakes have been made, heartbreaks have occurred. The important detail is what happens after trust has been broken. How does the organization make an accounting of and a reconciliation of errors? I know that sometimes after a breach of trust, a breach of covenant, some people will just storm off. And some people will just slide away, never to be seen again. Some people might have been too embarrassed by their conduct. Some people might have been so hurt that they do not choose to come back and work on rebuilding that trust. I can understand that. It's hard sometimes to see that there are still a few marbles in the jar, even after it's been tipped over. It's hard to gather them up. It's hard to start offering marbles again when you've just recently lost a lot of your own. But more often than not, there have been people who stayed and cleaned up the marbles and made a fresh pot of coffee, set out a tray of cookies, and began again in love. They might not have called it reconciliation, but it was the work that made it possible for people to come and set boundaries, acknowledge errors, offer and receive apologies, and remember why they even came here in the first place, and to start the work again. That's the heritage of this place. That's the heritage of any ongoing congregation. People coming together over and over to show up, to share thoughtfully, and in doing so within a covenant of right relations that starts by recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. To be a member here means building trust here. But we don't ask that you just trust blindly. Oh no. We'll show you. We'll show you how we have started the work of becoming trustworthy. And then we will invite you to join us in this work. Because done well, this is a powerful process. Done well, this is a transformative process. Done well, this is a holy process. May it be so. Blessed be. And amen.